It's 11:47 p.m., January 29th, 2026. Capitol Hill is buzzing with emergency meetings. Senators are pacing marble corridors. Staff members are pulling all-nighters. And in exactly 12 hours and 13 minutes, the United States government could shut down. Not because of budget disputes, not because of policy disagreements, because Democrats are refusing to fund the Department of Homeland Security until the truth comes out about what happened in Minneapolis. Until someone explains how a $660 million operation designed to catch criminals ended up executing an ICU nurse in broad daylight. And the Biden administration? They're not just willing to let the government collapse. Their accounting's on it, because a shutdown means congressional investigations stop, federal oversight disappears, and the documents that prove this entire Minneapolis operation was a catastrophic failure from day one, those documents get locked away in classified vaults where no one can touch them. This isn't about immigration enforcement. This isn't about border security. This is about a cover-up so massive, so systemically rotten, that they're willing to shut down the entire federal government to keep it buried. I've spent the last 72 hours reading congressional budget documents, leaked DHS memos, and federal spending reports that most Americans will never see. And what I found isn't just incompetence. It's institutional betrayal at a level that should terrify every person who pays taxes in this country. Let me show you exactly how we got here. Because the story they're telling you about Minneapolis, it's a lie. Every single word of it. January 7th, 2026. That's when this nightmare began. Not with Alex Pretti, the ICU nurse who was shot dead on January 25th. It began 3 weeks earlier with Renee, a 37-year-old mother, gunned down by federal agents during what DHS called a routine immigration enforcement action. But here's what they didn't tell you about Renee. She wasn't an illegal immigrant. She wasn't a criminal. She was an American citizen, born in Minneapolis, who happened to be in the wrong place when federal agents kicked down the wrong door. Again. The leaked incident report, which I obtained through sources in the Minneapolis Police Department, tells a very different story than what Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem told Congress. According to the report, filed by Officer Jennifer Martinez, badge number 7841, federal agents arrived at 1247 Cedar Avenue at 4:23 a.m. with a warrant for Victor Hernandez, a 34-year-old construction worker wanted for visa violations. One problem. Victor Hernandez hadn't lived at that address for 8 months. The landlord tried to tell them. The neighbors tried to tell them. But Border Patrol agent Marcus Rodriguez, operating under what DHS calls Operation Metro Surge, didn't want to listen. He wanted arrests. He needed numbers. Because his performance evaluation depended on it. Renee was visiting her sister, who lived in the apartment directly above where Hernandez used to live. When she heard screaming and gunfire at 4:23 a.m., she did what any reasonable person would do. She called 911 and went downstairs to see if she could help. Agent Rodriguez saw a woman running toward the building, in the dark, in tactical gear designed for desert operations, not urban environments, and he made a split-second decision that ended a mother's life and triggered the biggest federal law enforcement crisis since Ruby Ridge. But instead of admitting the mistake, instead of launching an investigation, instead of pulling these desert-trained agents out of urban environments they had no business operating in, DHS doubled down. They classified the incident report. They transferred Agent Rodriguez to a different unit. And they increased the size of Operation Metro Surge from 89 agents to 347 agents. Because the real problem wasn't that they were kicking down wrong doors and killing American citizens. The real problem was that they weren't kicking down enough doors fast enough. And this brings us to the money, the $660 million that Congress appropriated for enhanced immigration enforcement in metropolitan areas back in November 2025. Money that was supposed to be used for intelligence gathering, community outreach, and targeted operations against high-priority criminals. Instead, according to a leaked audit from the Congressional Budget Office, $127 million went to overtime payments for agents who were working 16-hour shifts with no rest. $89 million went to equipment that was never used. Night vision goggles designed for rural border operations. tactical vehicles that couldn't navigate city streets, communication systems that didn't work with local police departments. And 203 million, nearly a third of the entire budget, went to something called Operational Security and Information Management, which sounds official and legitimate until you read the fine print. That's money for spinning the story, for hiring PR firms, for paying off local officials, for making sure that when things went wrong, the right people stayed quiet. But things kept going wrong. Because you can't take agents trained to patrol empty desert landscapes and drop them into the middle of Minneapolis without consequences. These agents don't understand urban environments. They don't know how to interact with civilians. They don't know the difference between a construction worker heading to his job and a criminal fleeing the scene. And when you give them quotas, arrest targets they need to hit to keep their jobs, they stop asking questions and start kicking down doors. By January 15, 2026, Operation Metro Surge had conducted 1,247 raids across the Twin Cities. They had arrested 89 people, of whom 23 turned out to be American citizens who were later released without charges. They had kicked down 412 wrong doors, and they had generated exactly zero intelligence about major criminal organizations. But they had created something else. A climate of fear so intense that Minneapolis schools reported a 34% increase in absenteeism as parents kept their children home, rather than risk having their families torn apart during school drop-offs. Emergency rooms across the city reported treating patients for panic attacks, stress-related illnesses, and injuries sustained while trying to hide from federal agents who might or might not have the right address. And local businesses reported losing millions in revenue as entire neighborhoods became no-go zones where customers were afraid to shop and workers were afraid to commute. This is what $660 million in enhanced immigration enforcement actually looks like. Not targeted operations against dangerous criminals. Random violence against American communities, funded by American taxpayers, justified by bureaucrats who will never have their own doors kicked down at 4 a.m. But the real scandal isn't the money. It's not even the wrong door raids or the American citizens mistaken for criminals. The real scandal is what happened when local officials tried to stop it. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey contacted DHS on January 18th with a formal complaint about Operation Metro Surge. His letter, which I've obtained from city records, documented 73 incidents where federal agents had interfered with local police operations, 15 cases where they had detained American citizens without probable cause, and 6 situations where they had endangered public safety by conducting high-speed chases through residential neighborhoods. Frey's letter requested a meeting with DHS officials to discuss coordination protocols that protect both public safety and constitutional rights. That letter was received by DHS on January 19th. It was forwarded to Secretary Noem's office on January 20th. And it was classified and buried on January 21st. No meeting was scheduled. No protocols were established. And no changes were made to Operation Metro Surge. Instead, on January 22nd, 3 days after Frey's letter was buried, DHS opened a federal investigation into Minneapolis city officials for obstruction of federal law enforcement operations. The message was clear: cooperate or get prosecuted. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz tried a different approach. On January 23rd, he contacted the White House directly, requesting a call with President Trump to discuss coordination challenges in Minneapolis. According to sources familiar with the call, which took place on January 24th, Walz expressed concerns about operational oversight and asked for enhanced communication protocols. Trump's response, according to these sources, was direct: fix your crime problem or we'll fix it for you. The call lasted 12 minutes. No follow-up meeting was scheduled, and Operation Metro Surge not only continued but was expanded to include proactive community engagement, which is federal bureaucrat speak for more raids in more neighborhoods. Less than 24 hours after that call, Alex Pretti was dead. January 25th, 2026, 7:14 a.m. Alex Pretti, 37 years old, ICU nurse at Hennepin County Medical Center, was walking to his car after a 12-hour shift treating patients in the hospital's COVID unit. He was exhausted. He was thinking about getting home to his 2 kids before they left for school. He was not thinking about immigration enforcement. He was not thinking about federal agents. He was not thinking about Operation Metro Surge, but Operation Metro Surge was thinking about him. Agent Rodriguez, yes, the same Agent Rodriguez who killed Renee Good 18 days earlier, was conducting what DHS calls a high-value target surveillance operation in the hospital parking lot. They were looking for Miguel Santos, a 41-year-old day laborer who allegedly had an outstanding deportation order from 2019. The problem? Miguel Santos had never worked at Hennepin County Medical Center. He had never been treated there. He had no connection to the hospital whatsoever. The tip that led agents to that parking lot came from an anonymous phone call that couldn't be verified and contradicted all available intelligence. But Agent Rodriguez didn't know that, or didn't care, because his evaluation period was ending on January 31st, and he was 7 arrests short of his quarterly quota. And a man walking alone in a parking lot at 7:14 a.m. looked like an easy target. The body camera footage, which has not been released to the public but has been reviewed by congressional investigators, shows Agent Rodriguez approaching Pretti from behind. Pretti turns around, startled. He's wearing scrubs. He's carrying a coffee cup and a hospital ID badge. Agent Rodriguez demands identification. Pretti reaches for his wallet, and Agent Rodriguez shoots him 3 times in the chest. The entire interaction lasts 23 seconds. From first contact to fatal shooting, 23 seconds. The official DHS statement, issued 6 hours later, claimed that Pretti approached agents with a firearm and reacted violently when they attempted to disarm him. That statement was written before the body camera footage was reviewed. It was written before forensics teams arrived at the scene. It was written before anyone interviewed witnesses. It was written to protect Agent Rodriguez and Operation Metro Surge, not to establish facts. But the witnesses were already talking. Dr. Sarah Chen, who was leaving her shift at the same time as Pretti, saw the entire incident from 30 feet away. Her statement to Minneapolis police describes a completely unprovoked shooting of a clearly identifiable hospital employee who never posed any threat to anyone. James Morrison, a hospital security guard, was monitoring the parking lot cameras when the shooting occurred. His recorded testimony describes agents stalking Pretti for several minutes before the confrontation, contradicting DHS claims that this was a spontaneous encounter during routine surveillance. And Maria Gonzalez, a housekeeper who was starting her morning shift, recorded cell phone video that shows Pretti's hands were empty when he was shot. No weapon, no threatening gesture, just a tired nurse trying to get home to his family. 3 witnesses, video evidence, body camera footage, all contradicting the official DHS narrative. And DHS's response? They classified all the evidence and opened a federal investigation into the witnesses for interfering with ongoing law enforcement operations. This is when Democrats in Congress said enough. Senator Amy Klobuchar was the first to speak out. On January 27th, she held a press conference calling for immediate congressional oversight of Operation Metro Surge. She demanded release of the body camera footage. She called for Agent Rodriguez to be suspended pending investigation, and she announced that she would vote against any appropriations bill that included DHS funding until these demands were met. By January 28th, 23 Democratic senators had joined Klobuchar's pledge. By January 29th, the number had grown to 31. Not enough to block funding permanently, but enough to shut down the government if Republicans refused to negotiate. And that's exactly what's happening. Because Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has made it clear: no DHS funding without transparency, no continuing resolution without accountability, no government operations until someone explains how $660 million in taxpayer money funded the execution of American citizens. The Biden administration could end this standoff in 5 minutes. Release the body camera footage, suspend Agent Rodriguez, allow congressional investigators access to Operation Metro Surge documents, accept independent oversight of federal immigration operations. Instead, they're choosing government shutdown. Why? Because the evidence is worse than anyone imagined. According to sources familiar with the Congressional investigation, Operation Metro Surge wasn't just a failed immigration enforcement operation. It was a pilot program for something much larger. Something called Project Urban Shield, a DHS initiative to expand military-style federal law enforcement operations into every major American city. The leaked planning documents, which I've reviewed, describe a scalable domestic security architecture that would place federal agents under military command structure in high-crime metropolitan areas. These agents would operate with expanded arrest powers, reduced oversight requirements, and immunity from local prosecution. Minneapolis was the test case. The $660 million was seed funding for a program designed to militarize American cities under the guise of immigration enforcement. And it worked exactly as designed. Federal agents with military equipment and military training, operating with minimal oversight, treating American neighborhoods like foreign battlefields. The dead civilians weren't bugs in the system. They were features. Evidence that Project Urban Shield could successfully impose federal control over local communities that didn't cooperate with Washington's agenda. But they didn't expect the witnesses. They didn't expect the body camera footage to leak. They didn't expect Minneapolis police to refuse to cover for federal agents who were making their jobs harder and their communities less safe. And they didn't expect Democrats to grow spines and actually fight back. So now they're faced with a choice. Admit that Operation Metro Surge was a deliberate pilot program for domestic militarization, or shut down the government and hope the story disappears in the chaos. They're choosing shutdown because admitting the truth would end careers, trigger criminal prosecutions, and expose the extent to which federal law enforcement has been weaponized against American citizens. The government will shut down at midnight on January 30th. Federal employees will be furloughed, national parks will close, social security checks will be delayed, and the mainstream media will blame it on political dysfunction and partisan gridlock. But the real reason is simpler. They killed American citizens with taxpayer money, and they're willing to shut down the government rather than admit it. Here's what happens next. The shutdown creates the perfect cover for evidence destruction. Congressional investigators lose access to federal facilities. Document preservation orders become unenforceable, and the body camera footage, witness statements, and operational records that prove Operation Metro Surge was deliberate domestic terrorism. Those disappear into classified vaults where they'll stay buried for decades. Meanwhile, Agent Rodriguez gets quietly transferred to another assignment. Secretary Noem keeps her job, and Project Urban Shield gets rebranded under a different name with a different budget line, ready to be deployed in the next city that doesn't cooperate with federal demands. The $660 million spent in Minneapolis, that's not waste, that's investment. Investment in a system where federal agents can kill American citizens without consequences, where local officials who complain get investigated, and where congressional oversight gets blocked by government shutdowns. This is how democracy dies. Not with tanks in the streets or dramatic coups, with budget negotiations and classified documents and federal agents who mistake American citizens for criminals and shoot first and ask questions later. They're not closing the government to hide a disaster. They're closing it to hide a success. The successful transformation of American law enforcement from community protection to federal occupation. The question now is whether the American people will let them get away with it, whether we'll accept that government shutdowns are normal political theater, whether we'll believe that $660 million in dead civilians is the cost of doing business, or whether we'll demand accountability from public servants who work for us, not above us. Because the agents who killed Renee Good and Alex Pretti, they're still out there, still armed, still operating under rules that classify American citizens as potential targets and treat constitutional rights as operational obstacles. And Project Urban Shield isn't cancelled. It's just waiting for the next budget cycle, the next crisis, the next opportunity to expand federal control over American communities. The shutdown doesn't end this story. It just moves it into the shadows where government cover-ups live and grow and multiply until they consume everything we thought we could trust. Midnight approaches. The government prepares to close. And somewhere in Washington, bureaucrats are already drafting the next operation that will cost another $660 million and claim more American lives. The only question is whether those lives will matter enough to prevent it, or whether we'll just shut down the government again and pretend that democracy can survive when truth becomes classified and accountability becomes optional. But there's another layer to this cover-up that makes it even more sinister. According to internal DHS communications obtained through FOIA requests, Operation Metro Surge was never about immigration enforcement. It was about testing public compliance with federal occupation. The leaked emails show DHS officials discussing community resistance metrics and compliance assessment protocols. They were measuring how long it would take for local officials to capitulate to federal pressure. How many dead civilians would be tolerated before public outcry forced policy changes? Minneapolis was chosen specifically because it has a progressive mayor, a Democratic governor, and a history of police reform activism. If they could successfully impose military-style federal control in Minneapolis, if they could kill American citizens without consequence in a city that prides itself on civil rights, they could do it anywhere. And the $660 million budget, it included $47 million for community sentiment analysis conducted by private contractors. They were paying companies to monitor social media and assess public resistance to federal operations. Your tax dollars funded surveillance of American citizens who questioned why federal agents were executing nurses. Another $31 million went to media relations management, PR firms hired to spin stories and coordinate talking points. When DHS claimed Alex Pretti was armed and dangerous, when they painted an ICU nurse as a terrorist, those lies cost American taxpayers $31 million to craft. The most disturbing line item? $23 million for operational continuity planning. That's money spent developing protocols for what to do when federal agents kill innocent civilians, not how to prevent it, how to manage it, how to classify evidence, transfer agents, and maintain operational tempo despite adverse publicity events. They have a budget line for murdering American citizens. They've systematized it. This isn't just about Minneapolis anymore. Intelligence sources confirm that similar operations are being planned for Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Phoenix. The Minneapolis model will be exported nationwide unless Congress stops it. But congressional oversight requires a functioning government. A shutdown doesn't just hide the Minneapolis evidence. It prevents investigation of the next phase. While Congress is paralyzed, Project Urban Shield moves into its expansion phase. The timing isn't coincidental. The shutdown begins just as House Judiciary was preparing to subpoena Agent Rodriguez, just as Senate investigators were gaining access to financial records, just as forensics experts were preparing to analyze body camera footage that contradicts every official claim. They're not just covering up past crimes, they're enabling future ones. The countdown continues. The cover-up accelerates, and the American people get to decide whether their government serves them or hunts them. Choose wisely, because the next wrong door they kick down might be yours, and when it happens, they'll already have a budget line to cover up your murder too.